The town of Whiskey Ridge sat quietly in the shadows of the Rocky Mountains, a small settlement that lived and breathed the dust of cattle trails and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer. At first glance, it was like any other frontier town: wooden storefronts with sun-bleached signs, a saloon that never truly closed, and a church bell that rang on Sundays whether the pews were filled or not. But for Evelyn McAllister, the widow who owned the boarding house on the edge of town, Whiskey Ridge was no longer the place of promise it had once been. Her husband, Sheriff Thomas McAllister, had once been the heart of the town. Strong, fair, and unflinching in the face of danger, he had kept Whiskey Ridge safe for nearly a decade. But one stormy night, everything had changed. A group of masked bandits rode in, guns blazing, leaving behind smoke, broken windows, and blood in the dirt. Thomas fell in the line of duty, shot down before Evelyn's eyes, and with his death the soul of the town seemed to dim. That was 2 long years ago, and in those years Evelyn had learned what true loneliness meant. She kept the boarding house open, not because it was profitable, it rarely was, but because it gave her something to do with her hands, something to keep her from drowning in silence. She scrubbed the floors until the board shone, baked bread in the mornings so the scent would remind her of better days, and kept her late husband's rifle leaning against the front door. Few dared to cross her, for she carried herself with a quiet resolve that made even the roughest drunks think twice. Yet beneath that hard exterior was a woman who ached for companionship, even if she would never admit it aloud. The townsfolk respected her but never grew too close. Some said she was cursed, that the woman who had once been sheriff's wife carried the bad luck of his death. Others pitied her, offering her the occasional sack of flour or bundle of firewood, but always with a distance that stung. Nights were the worst. After the boarding house lamps were blown out, Evelyn would sit alone by the fire, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the rifle by the door and wondering if she'd ever feel safe, or loved, again. If loneliness wasn't enough, she faced another enemy, Silas Crowley, the wealthiest man in the county. A land baron with a reputation for greed, Silas had been circling her property since Thomas's death like a wolf waiting for its prey to weaken. He wanted the boarding house, not for its worth, but for the land it sat on, a key piece of ground that would allow him to expand his cattle empire. Every month, his hired men came knocking, reminding her that taxes were rising and suggesting she sell before it was too late. Evelyn always refused, though the threats in their eyes grew darker each time. Still, she endured. Every morning she drew water from the well herself, chopped wood for the stove, and greeted whatever weary traveler happened upon her doorstep. Though her hair had begun to streak with silver and her hands had grown calloused, there was still a sharp beauty in her eyes, the kind that spoke of both pain and fire. Evelyn McAllister was no fragile widow waiting to be rescued, she was a woman holding the line against a world determined to strip her of everything she had left. Yet deep down, she knew she couldn't hold on forever. The town was changing, the law was weak, and the shadows on Whiskey Ridge grew longer with every passing day. What she did not know, what she could not possibly guess, was that soon a stranger would ride in at sundown, and with him would come the first flicker of hope she had felt in years. The sun was sinking behind the ridgeline when Evelyn McAllister first heard the distant clop of hooves. Whiskey Ridge always grew quieter at dusk, shopkeepers shuttered their windows, drunkards staggered toward the saloon, and coyotes began their nightly howls from the distant hills. But on this particular evening, the sound of a lone rider approaching stirred unease in the still air, like the warning tremor before a storm. Evelyn stood on the front porch of her boarding house, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. She squinted down the dirt road. From the golden haze of settling sunlight emerged a figure on horseback, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a wide-brimmed hat tipped low to hide his eyes. His coat was weathered, frayed from travel, and his horse looked lean but strong, as though they'd been riding for days without rest. Most travelers arrived in the heat of day, eager for a bath and a meal. Few came at sundown, and fewer still rode alone. The stranger slowed as he neared her gate. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Evelyn noticed the way his hand hovered near his holster, not threatening, but alert. A man accustomed to danger. She lifted her chin. "You looking for a room, or just passing through?" His voice was gravelly, quiet but firm. "A room. If you've got one." She hesitated. Something about him unsettled her, not fear, exactly, but a prickling awareness. Still, business was business. "Stables around back. Water troughs fresh. Supper stew and cornbread, if you're hungry." He nodded, dismounted smoothly, and removed his saddlebag. Up close, she could see more: scars on his knuckles, a small burn mark on his wrist, and eyes that had seen too much. He handed her a few coins without haggling. "Name's Jack Rollins." She accepted them silently. She didn't offer her name. If he was any man worth his salt, he already knew it. Inside, the boarding house felt strangely different with him there, more tense, more alive. Jack ate without a word, his back to the wall, watching the windows as though expecting trouble. Evelyn pretended not to notice, but every so often, her gaze would drift back to him. He carried himself like a man used to violence, yet he never raised his voice or made a careless move. Dangerous, but disciplined. Later, as she washed dishes at the counter, she heard heavy boots thudding on the porch. Before she could reach the door, it slammed open. Two of Silas Crowley's hired men stumbled in, half-drunk and full of arrogance. Well, one of them slurred, leering. "Evenin', widow. Heard taxes are due again. You ready to hand over the deed yet?" Evelyn's spine stiffened. "You know my answer." The second man grinned wickedly. "Might be you change your mind soon. Crowley's getting tired of asking nice." Before Evelyn could respond, Jack rose from his chair. Slowly. Calmly. But his presence filled the room like thunderclouds rolling over a prairie. "You boys done here?" he asked, voice low. The drunkards turned, startled. One scoffed. "Ain't your business, stranger." Jack's gaze didn't waver. "It is if you're disturbing my supper." The first thug sneered. "You think you're tough? You don't know who we..." His words died in his throat as Jack took one deliberate step forward. He didn't reach for his gun, but he didn't need to. His stare alone was enough to chill bone. The two men exchanged a glance, their bravado leaking away. "We'll be back, widow," one muttered before stumbling out the door. Silence lingered long after they left. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I had it under control." Jack gave the slightest nod. "I know." She studied him carefully. "You used to be a gunfighter." He didn't confirm nor deny. Only said quietly, "Used to be a lot of things." And with that, he returned to his meal. Evelyn said nothing more. But that night, long after she blew out the lamps, she found herself awake in bed, wondering who Jack Rollins really was, and why fate had brought him to Whiskey Ridge just as the shadows were closing in. The days that followed passed strangely at the boarding house. Jack Rollins stayed longer than expected, not because he said so, but because he didn't leave. He paid for another night, then another. Evelyn didn't ask why. Travelers were often secretive, but Jack carried silence like armor. He spoke little, ate in quiet, and never turned his back on a doorway. Yet despite his guarded nature, he helped in small ways without being asked. When the fencing by the chicken coop broke, he mended it before breakfast. When a coyote prowled too close at night, Evelyn woke to the sharp crack of his rifle and found the animal dead by the barn. He even fixed the squeaky front gate that had annoyed her for years. Evelyn told herself she didn't care. Told herself she was merely grateful for the help of a paying lodger. But late at night, as she washed the day's dishes, she would catch herself glancing toward the stairs, wondering if he was awake too. Or thinking of her. The town noticed his presence quickly. Whiskey Ridge had a way of making strangers feel like painted targets. Men at the saloon whispered about him, "Looks like a bounty hunter." "No, outlaw." "No, he's too calm. He's seen war." Women peeked from windows as he walked past, curious but cautious. Some even teased Evelyn. "Careful, widow," said Martha Higgins, the general store owner's wife. "Taking a wolf, you might get bit." Evelyn only replied, "Better a wolf than a snake like Silas Crowley." Despite her defiance, she felt the pressure closing in. And soon enough, trouble knocked again, this time with purpose. It was near sundown when a rider dressed in all black appeared outside the saloon. His horse was sleek, expensive. His hat tilted low, his coat trimmed with silver buttons. A revolver hung at each hip, worn smooth from use. Clay Maddox. Evelyn didn't know the name, but Jack did. He was standing in the barn, brushing down his horse when he saw Maddox ride in. The brush stilled in his hand. His jaw tensed. No mistaking that face. They'd ridden together once, years ago, back when life was one long trail of saloons, smoke, and stolen gold. Maddox had always been fast, ruthless, ambitious. Jack had left that life behind. Maddox hadn't. And if he was here, there was only one reason. Silas Crowley had escalated. That night, Jack came into the kitchen, eyes darker than usual. "Crowley's brought in a gunslinger," he said flatly. Evelyn froze over the kettle. "You know him?" "I used to." She swallowed. "You rode with him?" It wasn't a question. Jack didn't answer. The silence stretched. Evelyn felt something heavy fall between them, not fear, but disappointment. Betrayal, even. She had trusted him. A little. More than she should have. "You should have told me," she muttered, setting the kettle down harder than necessary. Jack's voice stayed calm. "Would it have changed anything?" "Yes," she snapped. "I wouldn't have let you stay." He didn't flinch at her anger. Just nodded once, accepting her words like a sentence. "Then I'll leave at dawn." She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, the sound of laughter erupted outside. Rough. Mocking. Maddox and Crowley's hired men, gathering near the saloon, loud enough for the town to hear. 3 days, one shouted. 3 days and that land is ours." Evelyn's breath caught. Rage flared in her eyes. She reached for her husband's rifle, lifting it from the mantel with practiced ease. Jack stepped forward. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago." She strode to the door. Jack moved in front of her. "Don't be foolish," he warned. "You start shooting, they'll burn this house before morning." She stared up at him, anger warring with helplessness. "So what? I wait for them to take everything?" Jack's eyes met hers, steady, unwavering. "No," he said quietly. "You wait for me to deal with it." Evelyn held his gaze. She didn't fully trust him. But she knew danger when she saw it, and Jack Rollins walked like a man born for it. She lowered the rifle. Jack turned toward the door. The past he'd buried was coming to Whiskey Ridge. And before the sun set again, blood would likely follow. The morning sun burned hot and orange over Whiskey Ridge, turning the dusty streets into molten gold. A stillness hung over the town, not peaceful, but expectant, like the air before thunder. Word had already spread, Clay Maddox was here, and the widow's land was about to be taken, by force or by death. Evelyn McAllister stood on her porch with her husband's rifle slung across her arm. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were shadowed, but her spine stood straight. If this was the day her life ended, she would meet it standing. Beside her, leaning casually against a post as though waiting for a stagecoach instead of a gun battle, was Jack Rollins. His hat tipped low, revolver at his side, but his face was calm, too calm. A man ready for what he had been born to do. "You don't have to stay," Evelyn murmured without looking at him. Jack didn't answer immediately. He watched the dust cloud rising at the far end of town, Maddox and 6 riders, approaching slowly, enjoying the spectacle. "Finally," he said, "I told you I'd handle it." Evelyn swallowed. "This isn't your fight." Jack glanced at her then, his voice quiet but firm. "It is now." They heard doors creak open. Curtains shift. Whispering behind shutters. The townsfolk were watching. Afraid. Silent. Silas Crowley rode behind Maddox, smug as a king. When the group reached Evelyn's gate, Maddox dismounted first, boots crunching in the dirt. He looked up at Jack with a grin that held no warmth. "Well, I'll be damned," Maddox drawled. "If it ain't Jack Rollins. Thought you were dead or domesticated." Jack didn't move. "Leave." Maddox chuckled. "Always straight to business. I like that." He turned his gaze to Evelyn, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Ma'am. I respect a woman defending her land. Truly." but this ain't about you. It's about Crowley's money, and my paycheck. Best you step aside." Evelyn lifted her rifle slowly, her voice steel. "I buried one man I loved because of outlaws. I won't bury another because of cowards." Maddox smirked. "You think that ex-outlaw can save you?" Jack's voice cut in, low and deadly. "Try me." For a moment, time froze. Dust hung in the air. Maddox's hand hovered near his holster. Then, the saloon doors creaked open. A heavy-set man stepped out, Forge, the blacksmith. He carried his hammer like a weapon. "I stand with them," he said simply. Across the street, Mr. Higgins, the store owner, emerged with a shotgun. Then Deputy Harris, a young lawman who had always been too scared to do more than write fines, stepped into the street, rifle shaking in his hands. Maddox eyed them with amusement. "You all planning to die today?" "No," Forge said. "We're planning to live like men instead of rats." Evelyn felt something swell in her chest, not pride. Not yet. But hope. Maddox's grin faded. His hand twitched toward his gun. Jack moved like lightning. One shot. Maddox's hat flew off, his ear grazed but intact. A warning. The street erupted into chaos. Crowley's men drew their guns. Harris fired first, shaking but determined. Forge swung his hammer into one rider's jaw, knocking him from his horse. Higgins blasted another off his saddle. Evelyn's rifle cracked, a bullet slicing through the air. Jack faced Maddox directly. Their duel was inevitable. Maddox lunged, firing fast, but Jack anticipated, rolling aside, returning fire with terrifying precision. Maddox staggered, clutching his leg. Fury blazed in his eyes. "Finish it," Maddox roared. "Or I'll come for you again." Jack leveled his gun at Maddox's head. Evelyn held her breath. But after a tense pause, Jack slowly lowered his weapon. "No," he said quietly. "I'm done killing for the wrong reasons." Maddox stared up, stunned, not by mercy, but by shame. Crowley, seeing his advantage crumble, turned to flee, but Evelyn stepped forward, rifle aimed squarely. "Leave Whiskey Ridge," she said. "And if you ever send another man here, I'll bury you myself." Crowley believed her. He rode off like the coward he was. When the dust settled, Whiskey Ridge was silent. Then applause, quiet at first, then growing. Townsfolk stepped out, some weeping, some cheering. For the first time in years, Evelyn saw unity in their faces. She turned to thank Jack, but he was already walking away, holstering his gun, head low. He had defended her. Saved her. Yet he walked like a man who still believed he didn't belong. Evelyn wasn't about to let him disappear into the dust. Not this time. The sky over Whiskey Ridge was painted in soft pinks and golds as the sun climbed slowly over the mountains. The dust had settled from the battle, but the memory of it lingered in every footprint on the street, every broken fence post, every heart still beating a little too fast. Evelyn McAllister stood on her porch, watching the morning unfold. For the first time in years, she wasn't watching for threats. She was watching for someone. Jack Rollins. He hadn't taken a room that night. After the gunfight, he had helped the wounded into the clinic, tied up Crowley's men, helped extinguish the fire where a stray lantern had fallen near the saloon barn. Then, when all the town began to cheer and praise him, he simply walked away, as if applause made him uncomfortable. Evelyn understood then. Men like Jack didn't know what to do with gratitude. They only knew how to fight and then vanish. And she wasn't about to let him vanish. She found him behind the barn, tightening his saddle straps. His horse was already packed. He didn't look at her when he said, "I told you I'd deal with it. I did. My work's done." Evelyn crossed her arms. Is that what it was? Work? Jack paused. For the first time, hesitation flickered across his face. She took a step closer. "You could have ridden on days ago. You could have let those men take my land. But you didn't. Don't pretend it was just business." Jack finally looked at her. There was a storm behind his steady gaze, guilt, weariness, longing. "You don't know what I've done," he said softly. She held his stare. "Maybe not. But I know what you did here. And that matters more." He swallowed hard, looking away. "You deserve better than a man with blood on his hands." "Maybe," she said gently. "But I've lived alone long enough to know I'd rather have a flawed man who'll stand beside me than a perfect memory who's buried in the ground." Jack's breath caught in his throat. His grip tightened on the saddle leather. Silence hung between them, heavy but trembling with possibility. Then, soft footsteps approached. Ford's the blacksmith. Higgins from the store. Deputy Harris. Even Martha Higgins, arms folded sternly. They didn't speak to Jack. They spoke to Evelyn. "You keeping him?" Forge asked with a grin. Evelyn smirked. "Thinking about it." Deputy Harris scratched his head. "Town council's meeting tonight. Figured we'd offer him a badge." Jack blinked. "A badge?" Harris shrugged. "Town could use someone who knows how to shoot straight, and when not to." Martha raised a brow. "Besides, if he rides off, half the widows in town will chase after him anyway. Best keep him where we can see him." The group chuckled. Even Jack cracked a small smile. Evelyn reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed her hand over Jack's. "Stay," she whispered. "Not for heroics. Not for duty. Just stay for me." He stared at her hand, calloused but warm. Then at her face, strong, brave, unyielding. Finally, he nodded. Not dramatically. Not with vows or poetry. Just a quiet, certain nod. "I'll stay," he said. "If you'll have me." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "I already do." That evening, as the sun dipped low and lanterns flickered to life across Whiskey Ridge, the townsfolk gathered for supper in the street, tables pulled together, laughter echoing against the mountains. At the head of the long table sat Evelyn McAllister. Beside her, not as a guest, but as her partner in both peace and storm, sat Jack Rollins. And Whiskey Ridge, no longer silent, no longer afraid, finally felt alive again.